Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you to this webinar on free trade zones and free trade zone risk assessment. My name is Anton Moisenko, and I'm a research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI. And this webinar is a product of a 2-year partnership with the Policy Center for the New South as we studied the experiences of various countries in ensuring good governance in free trade zones. Before we get to the substance of today's discussion, which promises to be excellent with the array of speakers that we have secured for today, can I just make sure that all of you have logged into the right language version of today's event? The event is bilingual, so you can select whether you have dialed into the English language or French language version of it. And if you realize that you have not connected to the audio stream that you wish to connect to, please go back to wherever you found information about this event and choose the right link. With that, let me introduce the speakers for today's event, and we could not have been joined by a better group of people to discuss free trade zones and risks inherent in free trade zones. We're delighted to be welcomed by Ilham Khalil, who is responsible for marketing, communications, and corporate relations at Tanger Med in Morocco. We are also joined by Youssef Brigger, head of the Investment and Free Zones Office at the Customs Administration, by Thomas Dourneau, an expert on strategic governance, business intelligence, risk, and compliance, who will share some of the views from the private sector. And last but not least, my colleague Alexandria Reid, also of the Royal United Services Institute in London. Before we go to the discussion involving all of our excellent panel members for today, please allow me a bit of time to introduce the project and provide some context as to why we have gathered them and you here today virtually. We at the Royal United Services Institute in London have been conducting research on free trade zones for the past 2 years, as I mentioned, which was prompted by the recognition at the international level that free trade zones in multiple countries are significant vehicles for economic prosperity, development, trade, and investment. They have made a significant contribution to the well-being of a number of countries globally. At the same time, because free trade zones are so conducive to business, there have been instances of them being used by criminals in order to perpetrate nefarious activities, ranging from illicit trade to corruption to financial crime and beyond that. And in order to understand how countries can best reap the economic benefits of free trade zones while at the same time preventing their criminal misuse, we have started a project that focused on the experiences of 4 different countries around the world, Morocco being one of those countries. Those countries are diverse in a number of ways, but they're united by the fact that they have economically successful free trade zones that operate in those countries. We managed to go to Morocco 2 years ago, shortly before the lockdown hit Europe. So we had the privilege of seizing the opportunity and being there in the offices of PCNS and talking to a number of people in Morocco who have very generously given up their time to tell us their views about the Moroccan free trade zones, how they compare and contrast to free trade zones in the rest of the world, and what criminal risks they might entail. And so in the spirit of sharing the outputs of this research, we wanted to come back physically to present the findings. Unfortunately, we could not do that, so we have to choose the imperfect substitute of an online event. But we are delighted to be here with this panel of speakers. And also, we want to use this event to present a risk assessment tool that we have developed that hopefully will be useful to financial institutions, transport companies, and other businesses. So with that introduction, I will go through a very quick PowerPoint presentation that will outline some of the key findings from the research and provide a bit more context on that. And then I will go straight to the presentation of the online risk assessment tool. I hope that at this stage, all of you are able to see the slides on your screen. Thank you for those approving nods. As I mentioned, the project focuses on free trade zones, and just for the benefit of some people in the audience who might not necessarily live and breathe the topic of free trade zones, it's worth making a very quick definitional excursus to explain what we mean by free trade zones. When people talk about free trade zones, they might mean a variety of different things, because free trade zones can involve a range of economic benefits for companies that operate in them. But the basic international understanding of what a free trade zone is that it is part of a territory of a country where goods that are introduced there are not subject to import duties and taxes. On top of that, there might be a variety of other benefits that would be added. For example, reduced tax rules, reduced financial oversight regulations, and occasionally labor relaxations. The reason why free trade zones have been in the international spotlight comes down to the work of a number of international organizations over the past couple of years. The key among them is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that in October 2019 published a set of recommendations for clean free trade zones that incorporate a code of conduct that free trade zones are expected to abide by. There have also been reports by the World Customs Organization, European Parliament, and the Financial Action Task Force, the international standard setter on anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing, that have all focused on free trade zones and things that might go wrong there. For that reason, in order to understand how various countries deal with this shared challenge of exploiting the economic benefits while preventing the criminal exploitation of free trade zones, we have looked at 4 countries, as I mentioned, Morocco being one of them. So what did we find as a result of this research? As you would expect, the landscape varied dramatically across the 4 countries in question. And one of the things that we would like to tease out from the discussion today is the extent to which some of the things that we have learned in other countries might or might not be applicable to the experience of Morocco. So what you see on this slide is not necessarily something that is specific to Morocco, but it's rather the general global trends that we have gleaned from other countries. One of those is the lack of understanding of criminal risks in free trade zones that one might occasionally see in some countries. Then you've got countries with a variety of free trade zones that would be competing for business. And that is not always easy, although it is possible to reconcile that with creating strong anti-illicit trade and anti-financial crime standards. And in a number of countries, we have seen a situation where free trade zones have responsibilities for crime prevention, but there is a lack of formal monitoring as to how well, how badly they're doing in complying with those responsibilities. And finally, there is the inevitable truth that very often free trade zones face the transshipment of goods, that is to say, situations where goods pass through a free trade zone from one country to another country en route, but do not stay in that free trade zone. And therefore, the country in question might not necessarily have strong incentives to prevent illicit trade in the situations of transshipment. So how does the free trade zone risk assessment tool that we have developed fit into this landscape? The fact of the matter is that there are, by some estimates, more than 3,000 free trade zones around the world. Some of them have well-documented issues when it comes to risks that are inherent in those zones. Other free trade zones are much more secure, and sometimes by virtue of the kind of companies that operate there, they do not present remotely the same risks of criminal misuse. So it's important for anyone who's interested in the subject to be able to distinguish free trade zones that are higher risk from those zones that are lower risk. And it is also important for state authorities to be able to make those distinctions, to understand where their efforts should be focused. And it's with this in mind that as part of the project, we were keen to develop an actionable, practical tool that will enable private sector companies and potentially state authorities to understand risks related to free trade zones that they're interested in. At this point, let me share my screen again, but now taking you to the website that we have developed in order to enable this assessment. So let me go to the web browser, which hopefully you can see now. The most important thing from my presentation, and I promise it won't take much longer, is to remember the web address, which is ftz-risk@rusi.org. And this is the address that you should go to if you are interested in how the tool operates. You can go to the website and have a look around, explore it on your own. It is supposed to be fairly self-explanatory, but just for the sake of making it a bit less abstract and showing you how it operates in broad details, let's go through some of the main features of the online risk assessment tool. We are now on the landing page, so the main page of the tool. If you scroll down a bit, you will see a quick introduction to what the tool is supposed to achieve, and there is an instructional video that you can open. We will not be watching this video now because this is what I'm going to take you through in a matter of a couple of minutes, but it provides a fairly good overview of how the website works. So let's click Take Assessment now. We will be taken to an introductory page that provides some basic information about how the tool operates. Once again, you don't need to read this now because I'll talk you through some of the main details, but in case you're interested, you can read it in greater detail when you have a moment of time, or you can also find a PDF on the website that summarizes some of the key information about the tool for you. So let's enter the name of the free trade zone that we are interested in for the purposes of the assessment. Let's say example free trade zone. We're also asked to select the industry that we represent, and there are two options: financial sector, so that would be banks, insurance companies, etc., or transport sector, that would be shipping lines, freight forwarders, or other logistics companies. The reason why we have to make the selection is that the way that the assessment is structured and some of the risk factors depend on which option you choose. So let's imagine that we are a representative of a bank and we're interested in the degree of criminal risk that we're likely to face as a result of having a customer who is based in a particular free trade zone. We click Continue to Assessment, and once we do that, we see in front of us the first of 13 risk factors that we are invited to assess. The first of these factors, as you see, is corruption. The way that the assessment of this risk factor operates is that we are asked, in effect, to say whether we think that the country where the free trade zone is located poses low, medium, or high risk of corruption. You will see the instructions for how to make the selection on the left-hand side, that is here. You will see that the instruction simply says, please convert your organization's existing country financial crime risk rating on the scale of 1 low to 3 high. Well, what does that mean? That means that because we assume that in this instance you operate in a bank or insurance company or a similar organization, if you're faced with a particular free trade zone, very likely as part of your financial crime compliance program, you already have an understanding as to how risky the country in question is. And so we ask you to take that existing understanding and say whether you think the country is low, medium, or high risk in terms of potential corruption risks. If you don't have that existing in-house assessment, then we suggest that you refer to the Corruption Perceptions Index developed by Transparency International and convert the score that they provide in that index to low, medium, or high risk using the grade provided. So if you do take a moment and go to the Corruption Perceptions Index and open data on any particular country, then you will see that's a very straightforward exercise. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that in this case, the rating of the country you're interested in is 2 medium risk. Let's now go to the following risk factor. And I promise not to take you through all 13, but I just want to take you through 2 to show how the risk assessment system works. And it will really become much clearer with the second risk factor, which is focused on illicit trade levels. As you see, On the left-hand side, we've got the name of the risk factor, illicit trade levels, and we've got a grading system. Once again, 1 low risk to 3 high risk. The low risk option corresponds to there being no credible reports of widespread illicit trade in the free trade zone or the country concerned. And the highest risk option is there are credible reports of widespread illicit trade in the free trade zone concerned. Well, how on earth would you make that determination? One of the issues that we are very well aware of, having been undertaking this research for the past 3 years, is that there is often a lack of data on free trade zones and what happens there. So to overcome that obstacle, we list suggested data sources. You will see there are 3 categories of data sources listed here. Mutual evaluation reviews by the Financial Action Task Force, which often make comments on illicit trade and financial crime issues in the countries under evaluation. The annual International Narcotics Control Strategy reports published by the US State Departments, and NGO reports. Well, that does not sound very detailed. And the reason why it doesn't is because there is a separate page as part of the risk assessment tool that is called data sources that lists in greater detail the kinds of information that you might find helpful in identifying whether a particular free trade zone has, for instance, high levels of illicit trade or not. You will see here more of information on reports published by international organizations such as the FATF, national governments, free trade zones themselves, and a fairly extensive list of various resources produced by non-governmental organizations, who once again sometimes produce very helpful publications on illicit trade or financial crime. So effectively what the tool is saying on this page is that you should try to go through some of the data sources suggested here, about which you can find more information on the data sources page. And if you're lucky, then you will be able to find some data on the free trade zone you're interested in. Inevitably, sometimes free trade zones can be so obscure that very little information will be available. What do you do in that case? Well, you have to resort to what we call the default rating, which is basically the rating that you should choose if no information is available. So for instance, if you haven't managed to identify anything that bears on the level of illicit trade in the example free trade zone that we're assessing, for the purposes of this demonstration, you just go to the default rating. I hope this gives you an overall sense of how the tool operates. I'm sure that some of the listeners might have questions, or there will be uncertainties around some of the nuances of its operation, but we can discuss that during the Q&A session. And in the meantime, let me just demonstrate what happens when you complete the assessment. So if you bear with me, I will just select the default ratings for each of the factors, because thankfully for all of you, we don't have the time to complete a full assessment of 13 risk factors during this demonstration. So I just wanted to show you what you get in the end, and that will be it for the demonstration. I should say that when we were stress testing the tool, we tried to understand how much time it would take to complete the assessment for a free trade zone that you don't know very much about. The answer is approximately 1.5 hours to 2 hours, because there's a fair bit of research involved. So if you work in a financial institution and you operate frequently in a particular free trade zone, the idea is that it might well be worth your time to undertake that assessment and feed that into your compliance efforts. This is what you get in the end. This is the name of the sector you represent, the free trade zone that you were interested in, and the summary of the assessments that you have put in, as well as up there on your right-hand side, the ultimate score. In this case, medium risk, unsurprisingly, given that I have simply entered the default ratings for most of the risk factors. And you can download a PDF that will summarize this assessment for you. The important thing to mention is that the assessment can only be completed in one go, because we don't want to store any of the information that you input on our website. So nothing is stored, it's fully secure, and whatever you enter into the website, you can then download, but that's it. We don't retain any of the information that you have inputted. So I hope that was helpful background in order to understand the 2-year project that we have been engaged in and some of the outputs of that project. Some of this might be useful for Morocco-based stakeholders, including financial institutions and the transport sector. But of course, the objective of today's event is not for me to bore you with the presentation of our research, but to hear from this excellent panel on some of the key issues and challenges that free trade zones entail for Morocco in particular. And so with that, I will hand over to Ilham to tell us something about what free trade zones look like from the standpoint of a person who actually is involved in the running of them. So over to you, Ilham.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the presentation. It highlights really the good work that the organization has been doing for a couple of years already, or even more. And we have been part of it in the sense that whatever feedback we could give you was very interesting for us to see the results of as per today, for instance. So thank you very much. I will start first before attending to the questions and the feedback about our best practices here in Tangier Free Zone, in Tangier industrial platform, to give a little overview about what was our journey so far. So we started back in 2003 with a very prominent and ambitious project here in Morocco to put in place a port platform, an industrial platform, and third in synergy, working in synergy to enhance the competitiveness of the whole country, and to be a hosting place of foreign direct investment, a very technological one, a very value-added one. So we've been doing that for 20 years already. We're quite young structure, but we had all the ingredients to make sure that we have a value proposition for our customers. So as I mentioned, Tangier is as per today a global logistic hub on the Strait of Gibraltar, and we are connected today to more than 180 ports. We provide world-class services in different fields, in the maritime field. And of course, from the part that we manage in the industrial part and the free trade zone, we are more than 1,000 companies today, representing an annual business of 5 billion euros of export value in different sectors. The most prominent ones are being automotive, aeronautics, logistics, and services in general. So as per our experience as a manager of an industrial platform with Tangier, we act as a public administration with a really very interesting concept, which is a one-stop shop. That means that we partner with the investor from day one to see to show him the opportunity, and to see that the experience will be on the long run. So we give him the necessary data, because data is key when you go to a country that you maybe don't know or you are willing to invest there. So we give them the necessary data that we have in partnership with the different administrations. And once the project is successful, we take the investor through the whole process. And we are the only interlocutor, the only counterpart with our different services. But of course, this is one part of our job, which is to be able to commercially give the facility. But our main objective, and of course, it's been on our value proposition and our flagship, is to ensure the smooth running of operations once the clients are implemented in one of our platforms. And that being said, it takes a lot of it took a lot of benchmark of what are the good the good ways to do it elsewhere, because as I mentioned, we are a young structure, so we had to benchmark with other international structures, and we learned a lot from their experiences, and we tried to put in place the best way to ensure, of course, that all the operations are running smoothly for our operators. I will mention also that in addition to that, we use in terms of securing our more than 1,000 companies implemented today, is to show them that we use modern technology to ensure that all the barriers and all the threats that could be, that they will be facing are today well aware as our structure. And of course, we deploy daily basis communication with them to make sure that they are satisfied with the quality of the openness and willingness to talk with them directly, with the participation, of course, of the whole ecosystem. As you might know, Tangemed rely a lot on different administrations, the financial administrations, the local authorities, customs, and other financial structure. So yeah, we try to work together to make sure that we give the adequate solutions to our customers. And what can I say is as of today, and with the effort deployed within our structure and the whole ecosystem, the feedback that we have from our clients, and that shows, for instance, in the ranking that we take today as the second most performing free trade zone in worldwide, and the first in specific sectors. You have to bear in mind that one of the main reasons why we are mentioned, that we actually have been in this award and in this ranking, is because of the quality of the whole value proposition, but also the quality of the security that a structure like ours give. So, and this is a very reassuring for our clients, but it makes Tangemed industrial platform, I would say, a very favored hub for investing, and that makes it. I mean, there are a lot of reports, very credible reports that shows that, and of course we are very open, as per today, for initiatives that show what is going on worldwide in terms of new tools to face threats, and to make sure that we preserve the good work of so many years in terms of enhancing the economic and the logistic development of Tangemed ongoing. So this will be, I will say, my experience within Tangemed as per the subject.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ilham. This has been a fascinating overview of, as you said, the journey that you have been on. And I thought it was particularly interesting that if you look at the timing of that journey starting from 2003, it developed as the international understanding and thinking around free trade zones has matured as well. So it was really interesting to hear how you have been looking at the experiences of other countries. And I'm sure that other countries would be remiss not to look at your experience as well and trying to learn from some of the successes that you have ensured. So I'm sure this is one of the themes that we will return to throughout this webinar. But for now, if I may, I will hand over to Youssef for some of the customs perspectives and views on how to make sure that free trade zones bring benefits but don't create problems. I'm afraid you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. Our experience with free zones began in 1984. From the first law the Morocco have installed, to regulate this at this time, this new concept, free zones. The first one was installed in Tangier, and after that, we have 9 working free zones. We have 4 in projects and 3 under construction. So now we have a capital of 15. So we have an overview, a bigger scope than just the Tangier free zone. Now, our mission is double. We have an economic mission and a control mission. An economic mission is to be aware that we are the investors' companionship. We are here to accompany them, to facilitate all the procedures to make things smooth. We are in the government's pathway to make all investment procedure as cool and as easy as possible. So we have this double helmet. We are investors' companions, and also securing borders, securing the flow of merchandise and goods coming and entering. So our main mission is to make this control, Wait.
Sorry.
Can I continue?
If we could just mute the PCNS room, I think that's the problem. Sorry, go ahead, Youssef.
Okay. So we are in the control business. So we are in the exit point and the entry points of every free zones. And by the way, by 2021, this year, we don't call it free zones. It's zone d'accélération industrielle, industrial acceleration zones. That means not only the export mission that free zones have in the past 20 years. Now it is integrated with its surrounding. It's about a tissue that there are companies in the free zones and others in the industrial zone just beside, and there is a symbiosis, an osmosis between them to make the export process more valuable, adding a new value to the export process. So, in the matter of control, everybody is making this question: are free zones secure? Yes, they are secure, as all imports in Morocco are secure. It is treated by the same way. First level of control is the commercial control for every good entering in Morocco. The commercial control is all the declaration of simple or entry or exiting. All the goods that transit under the transit bonds of acquis à caution de transit. All the import declaration under economic custom regimes, and we know there is 8 custom regimes that's being used in the free zones, just as in the national territory for completing process of fabrication of goods. And there is also the release of consumption from goods from entering from the free zones to the national territory. So we have all these flags. There are 3 flags: entering merchandise from the free zones to the national territory, exciting merchandise from the Moroccan territory to the free zones, and we are talking about many free zones, and there is a transit system. A transit system when the good is transiting from a free zone to a free zone, going through the national territory for the roads, but there is a simplified procedure to make things easier for this merchandise that just transits, not having to be processed in any way. So controls are obligatory for all custom operation. That's a basic basis, and this control is to ensure the qualitative and qualitative elements of declaration, to the compliance of the good with the things declared. So it's a control that is done on the standard internationals. The other level of control is the physical verification. The physical verification, there is two ways. The automatic by the system, because there is an algorithm that takes account all the elements of the declared good, the quantity, the quality, the origin, the nationality, the quality of the importer, and everything is malaxed or processed by our data system, and this selectivity is targeting or aiming point of doubt, point of suspicion. Donc, it is automatic. It's about 10% from all the goods transiting from exiting or entering prisons to the Moroccan territory. But there is also a reselection. The reselection is manually. The custom officer is here to make a new assessment of the good and say, based on intelligence, doubt or suspicions or anything or a new information, we are going to make a physical complete control of this merchandise. That means we have a complete panel of controls that are making like an hierarchy to ensure all the suspicion points, they are well circled. By the way, customs are also well engaged in all international actions in fight against counterfeiting. Counterfeiting is a new prerogative introduced by the law. We have two laws for copyright and neighboring rights infringement. So there is a new mission that is given to customs, and our officers are trained in this subject. There is a whole deal of information, of formation, and continuous formation to be at the state of art of what is happening everywhere else in the world. So there is a data system that is used to how to say it, to handling requests, to make the follow-ups and make the evaluation of any counterfeits that is discovered. So there is a easy procedure to make suspensions of release of good on any pirated or on import or export or transit. It's automatic, and then all procedures that follows are ensured, because suspension requests are treated urgently, whether it is from national informant or international informant, and that covers all the trademarks, any products of auction, any various products of cosmetic, electrical appliance, leather goods, clothing or footwear, or anything that is touched by counterfeiting. Beside counterfeiting, which is very problematic, there is also the cooperation, the international cooperation of customs for endangered species, illicit trade of drugs or nocive substance, any kind of material that is prohibited by national law or international law and their international conventions. So all this process is applied daily, just in time, in all the flux coming and going from all the free zones. They are treated the same manner, with the same amount of vigilance, with the same amount of alert indicators. And just to accompany everything, our strategic plan from 2020 and 2023, we have four major line of action for all the philosophy of action of the custom administration. First, contribute improving business environment in Morocco by providing security on the border, improving governance and quality of service for all the companies that deal with export and import, reducing delays of passing through customs, reducing procedures, simplifying also procedures, and making a personalized accompanyship. We have many solicitations, and many times we have some new or specific companionship procedure for these special companies that maybe sometimes have some special requirements. That's what we call our philosophy of facilitations. We are strengthening partnership with companies working in free zones and in the national territory in this philosophy of PPP, a partnership private and private, public and private, and which is a key point that everybody is ensuring to be strengthened by each year. And the last point is developing skills. We are making enormous efforts to develop the internal formation, internal awareness, internal participation of all our staff in every level. So everybody has the same amount of information, of involvement and internal culture about this key point that all the custom administration is following as accompanying the government target for the upcoming decade strategy. And thank you if you have any questions.
Well, thank you very much for this very rich and interesting presentation. As we like to say, as we did this research, we understand that simply calling the place a free trade zone does not open the door to crime, right? It's just another port, and you just have to be clever about how you control it. But I guess the challenge with successful free trade zones is precisely because you have so much trade there, you have such a richness of commercial activities that take place there, that you have to be clever about how you go about controlling the free trade zone. And so it was really interesting to hear about how you approach this with public-private partnership.
Just another point in your presentation, Madam Ilham will give you this. We accompany, we make the accompaniment of creation of every free zone from the first decree of creation in the government instance. So we are here when it is created, the first text of law. We are here when it's implemented and placed. We are here when it is being developed. And one requirement is the zone must be under a wall or a fence or something. And there is only one point of entry, and customs is at the point of entry. So there is only one exit, one entry, and customs is in the focal point at the entry. So the free zone is a confidence zone. Everybody is here for making business, a good, a clean, and clear procedures and a clear production. So it is about confidence between customs, the company which is managing the zone, and the companies implanted in the zone. So it's a confidence circle. No one is suspecting anyone, but we are here. There is vigilance, there are procedures, and there is a control. Selectivity is random control made by the system, and that's ensure this high level quality of control.
Okay, brilliant. Well, there's plenty to go into in more depth later on. And just a word for our audience, if like me, you find that you have questions that you note down to ask of the speakers in the Q&A session, then whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please make sure to put questions down into the comments, and then we will have access to those questions and we will be able to ask them of the speakers. But in the meantime, let us turn to Thomas, who is a rare bird on this webinar, and that you are part of the private sector and you advise companies on how they should assess risks. So how do you approach free trade zones and some of the issues that they might pose?
Okay, thank you, Anton. First, I'd like to apologize for the audience hearing me cutting the voice of fellow speakers, Mr. Briga, and I'd like to really congratulate you guys for the tremendous work you've done on this project. We spoke about it 2 years ago. Now I'm glad to speak in front of you again. So regarding free trade zones, I believe, from my point of view, from a business consultancy firm on risk and compliance and also a researcher on business climate and governance, we talked about this 2 years ago, but there is a big difference in terms of risk between free trade zone in a country, for example in Morocco, in several cities hosting industries such as aircrafts or automotive, and free trade zones that are also linked to ports. And I believe in terms of illicit trade or risk in terms of also organized crime, those are two different level of risks. And like we said, free trade zone located in ports might be more difficult to assess due to the huge amount of flux in terms of merchandise and also finance that goes through them, specifically in Eastern Asia. On a business perspective, I'd say that this is sometimes a black box in terms of informations, because free trade zones are difficult to, it's sometimes difficult to gather information on companies actively operating in free trade zones, since you don't really know what we called UBO, ultimate beneficial owners or ownership. You did highlight it in your criteria on the risk assessment tool, so that's a very good thing. And mostly our clients are trying to identify what risk they might come into when they are trying to do business in those areas, and we have to give them intelligence, informations to assess clearly the risk they are going to meet. Those are difficult because you have several partners, financial partners, also organizations that are not really transparency in sometimes in free trade zone. The sourcing is very, very important in terms of intelligence. You did highlight it last in your risk assessment tool, so that's a very good point. On financial, I'm speaking on mostly on financial institutions. I'm not focusing on Morocco. I believe free trade zones in Morocco are very secure, since it's part of a full government plan with industrial acceleration programs integrated on it. But in some other region, and you have also worked in Panama, for example, or in the Emirates, it is difficult to know and to gather intelligence, also because there is a lack of indicators. Sometimes intelligence are too old, sometimes informations are too old, sometimes this is not transparent, sometimes authorities can hold back on information to private companies, to private agents. Cooperation is different between public agencies, so there is cooperation between customs agencies across the world, but when you are a corporate firm, it's totally different. So this is an interesting tool to assess those risks. It must be, I believe, also strengthened on the other side by, in my line of business, by other sources, like we spoke about it with Alexandria, because sometimes the access, strictly the access to commercial information is also restricted in some areas. So there is this problem. So this is always the same. When you're speaking from an external point of view, you need to have the proper information to assess the risk your client is going to meet. And I believe initiatives like yours are doing the job, to speak clearly, because we can access information we shouldn't have thought maybe before, and we have a better perspective on what are the risks we might meet on those areas.
Okay, well, brilliant. Thank you very much, Thomas. Very interesting. I think the point you made about transparency is hugely important. It is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the cornerstones of the OECD Code of Conduct and clean free trade zones as well. So it's both external transparency, but also things like being able to collect information within the zone and what is going on there. So one aspect of that would be, for instance, the drive towards electronic means of payment rather than the circulation of cash, right? It's also an aspect of trying to understand what is actually happening within free trade zones. And that is more relevant to some free trade zones in the world than others. And that might be a good segue to ask Alex about some of the work that we have done elsewhere, and for some comments on how the Moroccan experience compares or contrasts with what we've seen in other parts of the world.
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Good stuff. Okay, so as Anton introduced, we had 4 case studies in this particular research project that helped to develop our risk assessment tool, and those were Panama, Singapore, the UAE, and Morocco. And I have to say that actually each case study was completely invaluable, because it really gives you a sense of the sheer diversity of free trade zones around the world, not least in their kind of economic purpose, their governance regime, and ultimately the risks that they might be exposed to. So it's very clear that a free trade zone in Panama will be exposed to very different risks to the free trade zone in Morocco. And that kind of search for more granularity beyond calling all free trade zones high risk was the rationale of our project. And I have to flatter my panelists at the start here, as I really did learn a lot from the generosity of time that they gave us when we met them 2 years ago, and their perspectives about FTZs in the Moroccan context. So if I repeat them now in my little speech here, it's only because I was listening the first time when we met 2 years ago, and many of those thoughts made their way into the paper. And the first thing I think that I took away from the Moroccan experience compared to the other free trade zones that we looked at was really the kind of passionate and eloquent way in which government authorities spoke about the value of free trade zones from a trade and development perspective in particular. So it was very clear that there was this sense that free trade zones are often criticized at the international level without thinking about the role that they play in national economies and the kind of the benefits that they give to developing economies in particular. And it was clear to us from our visit why free trade zones, and I think it's clear again from hearing from our colleagues here, why they remain so central to Morocco's industrial acceleration plan, the second one, which runs from 2021 to 2025. And part of that is because, as the panelists have mentioned, the sectoral way in which the free zones in Morocco have been organized. So to develop them in a way that seeks to attract specific businesses, that provides very tailored incentives, has been very successful economically, and it's been praised by the World Trade Organization and the UN Conference on Trade and Development. But what that also taught us in terms of feeding into the risk assessment tool was the importance of understanding the incentives that are specific to each zone and understanding the kind of business rationale of a particular zone, because this can provide a really useful means for assessing what suspicious might look like. If you're a financial institution, or if you're a transport sector intermediary, and you notice that your client is transacting in a market where you wouldn't expect that commodity or that company to be transacting or exporting to, then that's a very clear kind of red flag. And that really helped us to feed into our tool to say, focus on the incentives of the zone and the business purpose of the zone. I also think separate to that, but related, because Morocco's free zones are so economically successful, we heard from many different stakeholders about the value of the fact that they had attracted multinational corporations. And it was seen that the economic success, that the ability to attract those companies was also raising standards within the economy. So we actually heard from several stakeholders that they perceived free trade zones to be potentially more secure than, say, other logistics facilities or more informal manufacturing centers within the national economy, because they were regulated, because they had multinational corporations who bring their own procedures and bring their own opportunities to upskill sort of managerial levels who can then disseminate those practices more broadly. I think a final point from me as well, and to pick up on what Thomas said about the complexity of the number of actors and the disparate sources of information that they hold, even within a digitized trade system as exists in Morocco today. We also were very encouraged to hear about the Interagency Commission that's chaired by the Ministry of Finance, how that brings together all of the different actors who are responsible for regulating and ultimately supervising and enforcing within the free trade zones. That was definitely something that we didn't see in many of the other case studies, and it was seen to be a real asset in the Moroccan context. But I would also love to hear from the panelists here today, not to steal Anton's role as chair, but to what extent that is effective, if it works in practice, how that can be modeled elsewhere in other contexts.
Well, Alex, you're more than welcome to steal my role, and thank you very much for that question. So I cannot do better than just to readdress the final question you mentioned there to perhaps first Ilham and then Youssef around the interagency cooperation, best practices and the progress done in that.
Well, if I have to enhance one type of collaboration that is here, that was put in place to put everybody on the same pace of the same objective, which is really accompanying our investors to be successful in Morocco, is to be all gathered and prepared from day one. That means that just to give you an example, when we do all the due diligence about the interesting part of the investment, we don't really enhance the incentives or enhance all the business-friendly environment that we have. This is something that, in general, the multinational already know. They did already their works in that. But when they see that all the administrations are aligned and they are there from day one to help them understand their business, to understand what can be done in the industrial zones and logistic zones, and how we can together do it in a successful way. This was the key takeaway for us. So we capitalized in that, and we did establish like an ad hoc environment where we exchange these best practices, and we open our doors to provide these best practices to other organizations. And of course, my colleague from the Moroccan Customs will give you so many examples. Last time we gathered here a very important meeting from the World Trade Organization and the World Customs Organization. We gave a very interesting and practical case studies. And for that, also we rely on the feedback of our industrialists that are implemented. So whenever we can have their testimonial about the good and the way to improve things for other comers, so we listen to that and we look to ways to implement that in a very interesting way. So if I would just enhance one very key takeaway in this special collaboration, that would be that.
Okay, thank you. Anything from your side on that, Youssef?
Thank you. Our experience in free zones has gone a long way. It has begun from 1984, and it has developed. It has developed in conjunction of all the creation of all the new free zones that have been implemented across the country. There was one, and now we have so many. We are so proud of it, and we are aware of their roles. We are aware of the level of contribution, of participation, of partnership we are dealing with. We must provide to all these people, to all these companies, to all these investors, because investing in a country is an act of trust. So we are aware that if people choose the destination Morocco, whether it is investing in free zones or in the national territory, it's a good point. It's a national proud for us. It's a Moroccan image in the international. So we are aware of this companionship. So whether it's in free zones or in national territory, investments and free zones are the same. They are our focal point, let's say a topic, which is monitored in every level of custom administration, from the general director to the lowest agent working at the entry point. Everybody is collaborating and having this philosophy for providing the maximum effort of facilitation. That's the key word, and that's our philosophy. And I work in a direction which is called facilitation. We don't call it procedure anymore, because it's the philosophy of our work. We are, from day one, engaged in this investments process, in this investments horizon, and in this facilitation pathway. So it's a philosophy we use every day. And when you are talking about monitoring risk factors are treated the same, equal as facilitating procedures. They must go the same. You must not forget about facilitation, but not forget about control. They must have the same amount of intention, and we have an equilibrium just to make everything goes, whether by the helmet of controller and the helmet of facilitator. Thank you.
Can I just ask a follow-up question on this? Because one of the things that we have heard in another country where we did our research is that, look, the way that, for example, the maritime port works is that if you open a certain number of containers per day, the life of a port is paralyzed, right? So there's limit as to how much controls you can practically have. But if you have significant amounts of trade going in and out, if you have a wide variety of businesses working in a certain geographic area, then inevitably you have to be alive to the risk of illicit trade happening there. And that raises the premium on finding some risk-based ways of controlling the containers that come into and leave the port. You have to do more due diligence on businesses that operate in the zone. And I was wondering, from your standpoint, how do you address that tension between, yes, you don't want to stifle trade, you want to facilitate it, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you are policing the zone in ever more intelligent ways as there is more trade, more investment, and more activity happening there?
I don't think there is so many point d'étranglement, these fragment points. So many, because the time in custom have been reduced dramatically, and now we are having maybe the one of the lowest time in custom. I speak bien. Time in custom, the procedure is very, very low. It's in this international standards. what you are saying here is natural. Maybe sometimes it may occur, but we are emphasizing and encouraging people and encouraging companies to go on certification, opérateur économique agréé. Agreed, I don't know how to pronounce it, accepted economic operator. Yes, that's categorization. So this, once you have established your elements of trust, because there is a study behind, and you have this label, you are now in a trusty zone, a green zone, where you can have all your operation processed due to your clean file. You don't have any litigation, you don't have any problem with customs, everything goes smooth, all your declarations are accepted, and that's a win-win for customs because we reduce amount of control, and for the operators because he is benefiting from a smooth passage through customs.
Yeah, no, that does make sense, and I think that there are certification programs that have now been launched for free trade zones themselves, like the one by the World Free Zone Organization, that are very much based on a similar logic of similar to the concept of the authorized economic operator, where you fulfill certain requirements in the beginning. There's a system of making sure that you still comply with those requirements, and then you're afforded a higher level of trust than someone who hasn't undergone that certification. I wanted to turn to you, Thomas, if I may, in case you have any reflections on the interagency cooperation bit and how different organizations that have responsibilities for the running of a free trade zone ensure that they do not overlap and work together harmoniously, but also from the standpoint of clients of private sector companies who consider operating or investing in a free trade zone. What are the key changes or indeed key progress that you saw has been made in terms of how state institutions cooperate with those private sector companies, share information, and make free trade zones an attractive place to work in?
So to answer the first part of your question, regarding interagency cooperations, I believe I'm not best judge to that because I'm not part of any customs agency in the world, but I believe things are running smoothly. So there is always channel of coordination and communication between those organizations. The biggest risk is about Morocco, is more about transshipment from goods that might have been illegally shipped into a boat in another free trade zone in another port across the world. About the business perspective, this is two different things because this is not, we have a channel of communications and there is mostly also information published by the customs agencies across the world that are used to several consultancy firms and risk assessment companies, but it still remains sometimes difficult to assess because when your client is asking you to identify a risk about a company, the risk might not be inside the free trade zone as you thought first. It might be outside. It is always the point of how to identify the full hierarchy of this organization and who is also behind the local company in a group, but also who is, like I said before, the UBO that might be, I don't know, in Singapore or somewhere else. So the biggest point of concern at this stage might be always the publication of information. You guys are coming from an Anglo-Saxon, from England, so this is always more clear to you that you have some public information about company. This is not the case in most Latin countries, for example. So this is always difficult to assess those informations, and it is more difficult to do it from foreign countries about a company that is based in free trade zones. This is most of it. But it's all about transparency at this point.
Yeah, no, I'm sure transparency is such a key point in you know, a lot of
this is
a lot of issues
process you talked about, and also Hilam talked about. This is we are doing it before the implementation in the FTZ, or when there is a real concern, but it is mostly done before.
Yeah, no, and you know, one of the things that we hope that our tool will help achieve is, in a way, stimulate kind of greater transparency from free trade zones, because you want people to understand that you're being compliant, and you want people to understand that you're a safe place to do business in.
It's a good aggregator of information, and it does bring knowledge on this topic. So this is a very good thing.
Brilliant. Thank you. There is another question that in a way has emanated from, I think, all of your remarks, which was the impact of international standards and international experience on what happens in Morocco, and perhaps contrary-wise, the lessons that other countries should learn from the Moroccan experience. I was wondering if perhaps you, Youssef, would like to maybe start addressing that with the way that you follow and respond to, for example, new standards set by the OECD, publications by the World Customs Organization, with this variety of international processes ongoing. How do you respond to them, and how do you make sure that the position and experience of Morocco is well understood?
Morocco is part of the Commerce Organization of World Customs Organizations, and the many bilateral and international conventions in the world. So we are an active part in these organizations. Their frameworks, their regulations, and their legislations are accounted for in our proper legislation. We are at the standards of any country, you name it, because we are working on this global issue, on this global scale, and having this global scope of world commerce. So anything is implemented due to this regulation to be at the top, just in time in these standards, and that's our goal, and that's definitely a point you can bet on. Thank you.
Thank you. Ilham, anything to add from your perspective of kind of making some of the change in international standards operational, right? Responding to, say, the standards set by the OECD, or indeed you mentioned that as you were trying to, in a way, update the controls and procedures that you have in place, you were looking to the experience of other countries. So perhaps there are some interesting examples that you might draw on.
Interesting question, actually. The thing is that it was a mindset that was established from day one of implementing the rules in the free zone law in Morocco that applies to Tanger free zone, but also to the whole free trade zones in Morocco. Because we did the whole work beforehand, and we take all the good takeaways, and the rules are completely understood, and we were part of implementing them in the way we manage our ports and zones, makes us as a country quite at ease with the fact to be able to sign free trade agreements, to be able to be open to international investors to come. So the regulations helped us to keep the international mindset and keep the main purpose, finally, of the whole acceleration in the industrial and the logistic view of Morocco. So it only helped us on the way of keeping all what has been done and prospecting and projecting us in what's going to come in terms of enhancing and tapping into other new investments, other new markets. So I think the way is very bright ahead of us as a country and as a As Tangemet specifically, in terms of we still maintain the pace of encouragement and the synergy that are already implemented helps us actually be able to be a good, I will say, case study for other experiences. So yes, we should, of course, be open to any good key takeaways, any good experiences and the rules, but also keeping in mind that this openness will only help us be a focus and be shortlisted as a very interesting destination of investment so far.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, when we came to do our research in Morocco, we did encounter a lot of openness and willingness to discuss these issues with us. So we hope that the resulting product was fair to what we learned and what we saw on the ground. Youssef, did you want to come in on that again? I thought you unmuted yourself. No. Okay. Thomas, anything from your perspective on sort of the international standards and where they're going and examples of other countries? Because obviously, as you mentioned, Morocco is quite unique. There are probably quite a few other countries that you have encountered in your work with different free trade zones there. What is kind of the general direction of travel? How do you think the situation is evolving internationally?
I think the framework is kind of going in the good way, because we know that you mentioned FATF, for example, in your assessment tool. So many countries, not only the 4 countries you did assess, but many countries, including in Africa, are trying to use the FATF framework to first assess their environment and their own free trade zone, and also to bring those zones at the best level possible, to put best practices into those free trade zones. But there is still some, like I said, black box in some specific areas, mostly in Eastern Asia, that when you see that this is not about the legal framework that is causing problem, but it's more about governance itself. So there might be a good framework, and the problem after that is to see if the framework has been really, how can I say, respected? Like, is it really effective? Are the authorities locally doing their job? Is there a good, for example, a good due diligence process on the side of the authorities, not customs, not security, for example, but just registration authorities to let companies into those FTZ? Because you might find, I don't know the word in English, but homme de paille. I mean, people that are registered in those subsidiaries in free trade zone are not really acting as owner, but are you just there to act as a first line of those companies. So the framework at international level is going on the right direction, but there is still efforts on specific areas. I won't mention names here because you've already worked on those areas specifically, sometimes in Latin America too. And this is a huge work, a huge first of advocacy on best practices to those areas. And then this is the same as Mr. Briga said, there is always a helmet of the controller and the facilitator. You will have to bring the helmet also of the advocate and the controller, because advocacy is not the only tool that you will have to use on this topic. But it is a really difficult problem.
Yeah, it's yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
For me, I don't think it's a difficult problem, but it's a delicate problem. It's implementing all these controls, and by the same time having the least time for passing through customs, having the most secured and easy procedures, and facilitating while maintaining control. It's a delicate balance, I always say it. and it's a challenge, and we are up to the challenge. We are doing our best to have all the tools and all the due diligence to make that challenge come true. It's a daily challenge.
Brilliant. Well, I'm mindful of the time because you're all busy people and we are close to the end of the hour and a half that we have been allocated. So before we wrap up, I would ask you to think about a 1 minute, 2 minute summary of the key point that you want the audience to go away with, or something that you think they should really remember from what we discussed today. But in the meantime, can I just go to Alex with a quick question? We have spoken so much today about international standards and the international framework, but what exactly are those, and kind of where do we stand with some of the recent developments like the OECD and the World Free Zone Organization standards?
Absolutely. So I think free trade zones are a conundrum if you're sitting in an international organization that aren't necessarily on the ground talking to people about the economic role that they play, because there is this sort of perception of, well, they're so berated internationally, they seem to be so risky. It's almost confusing that countries keep establishing them. And in fact, the UK government is now bringing in 8 free ports towards the end of this year. So I think that dialogue between those who are applying the standards and the users and the administrators of free trade zones is a very important outcome of our project. And I hope that that kind of continues and that we can continue to do that. I think it's, from an international standards perspective, a question of being pragmatic. So looking forward, as Yusuf says, to the regulation and supervision that enables that balance that's acceptable of trade facilitation and also security. And I do think that it is fair to say that we don't always get that right. And that to kind of revive the reputation of free trade zones, there needs to be an effort to demonstrate transparency, to kind of demonstrate credibility, to demonstrate that security measures are being taken to the same extent as they would be in other logistics facilities. And here you have the OECD's Code of Conduct for clean free zones, which will focus on the administration level and will provide a kind of toolkit to help them say, okay, well, we meet these agreed minimum standards. And that's really the first time that I think we have seen a pragmatic approach, which is to tell free trade zone administrators what we actually expect of them if we are to say that they are secure. And the same thing as well with the World Free Zones safe zone certification. I think it's a really useful external mechanism for people looking in, for business users, for the types of people that Thomas is assisting, to see the attitude of a free zone administrator as well, to see that they are willing to undergo the certification process. That in itself is a very, positive sign. And I think, as we've heard here today, and particularly from Ilham, that it doesn't actually benefit a government to have a zone that is perceived to be, prone to illicit trade or perceived to be unsafe. You actually want to attract trade to these zones. So drawing on those incentives and kind of encouraging and rewarding good behavior by using those codes of conduct, I think is a very important lever. And what I hope our tool will do conversely is to assist the private sector in better understanding their exposure, because I think prior to this, like with the minimum standards, there's never really been a way of looking at free trade zones in a very kind of organized fashion of what are the actual risk factors. And hopefully many people will find that actually a free trade zone that they're looking at is potentially lower in risk than treating everything as a blanket high risk kind of venture.
Thanks very much, Alex. And a quick round of final comments before we wrap up. Ilham?
Well, as a conclusion, I would say that the key takeaway here is that as per our experience at Tanja Med Zones, we would like to keep having the flagship that we make Morocco a favorable hub for business. That means given the appropriate environment, the appropriate infrastructure, what the investor needs to be successful. This is the first aim that we have and that we will keep on doing. And of course, we offer a good opportunity, and we want to keep on offering this good opportunity for these companies to be interested in our country, because when they are interested, so it's a win-win situation. We participate together to a very interesting journey of successful economical, educational, and of course business friendly environment. So this is very important to highlight and to end up with this interesting webinar, I would say, my part.
Thank you. Youssef.
Thank you. What am I going to say must have been in the introduction. The experience of free zones in Morocco was a success story from the start. And they provided exporters, and particularly exporters, with all the good combinations of regulations, incentives, advantages, and the proximity, and all the legal framework they needed to have an effective business and fast and easy and effective. And that's why there is a huge demand on our free zones. Our free zones are thriving, now they are developing, and there is absolutely a shortage of places and for implementations. We know that many people are interested in our free zones. So apart of all the legal incentives presented, we have a personal companionship for all these companies. So in other words, this is a really accurate framework for exporters, and they are really enjoying working in free zones and all interaction with customs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas?
Yeah, so to finish, I'd like to say that Morocco is climbing in the doing business ranking. So to do it, they did implement a lot of organizational reforms, and free trade zones are part of it. To reassure investors, on my line, I'd say, it must keep going on this way, and it is going on this way. So the next step, I'd say, would be moving from the organizational and public perspective to a more business-friendly perspective in improving transparency and availability on information. So it will reassure investors and help free trade zone to attract further investors.
Brilliant. Thank you. Last but not least, Alex.
I don't have too much more to add to that. Just to thank everyone in this panel for all of the expertise and the time that they've given us throughout the research process, to thank PCNS for all of the support that they've given us as a project partner, and just to say that we hope to continue working with you in the future and to help share Morocco's experience worldwide.
Thank you. And let me just briefly echo Alex's thanks to our excellent panelists for today, and also to Mohammed, Abruk, and the team at PCNS. The only reason why we were able to get this panel together and why you as members of the audience were able to get the links and dial in and everything ran so smoothly is all completely to their credit. So thanks very much, everyone, and goodbye for now.